Well, I mean, this is a very difficult time for Connecticut. We have, for generations, we've made the promise that education is the great equalizer. You know, we enter into a social compact with families and say, if you work hard, you pay your taxes, we're going to provide you with good public schools so your kids can study hard and they can get jobs, they can pay taxes, and the cycle continues. Unfortunately, as we look at the state of public education in Connecticut today, we realize we've failed to deliver on that social compact. Right now in Connecticut, whether you get a good public education, whether you have access to a high-quality public school, depends almost entirely on your race, your family income, or your zip code. We're not providing the high-quality education that Connecticut once did. And you look right now, and we're failing our students almost across the board. One of the things that Connecticut participates in, as does every other state in the country, is we all have our students take the NAEP exam, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's known as the nation's report card. And every state has their students take this exam so that we finally have an apples-to-apples comparison. We can see how states are doing vis-a-vis other states in educating their kids. This isn't about state standards that can be watered down or built up. This is one measure for every state in the country. And so we just had last month the release of 4th and 8th grade reading and 4th and 8th grade math exams. And what we saw was frightening. What we saw was that Connecticut now experiences the largest achievement gaps in the country. And what that means is if you are a low-income student, you are an African-American student, you are a Latino student, you have the largest gaps in achievement compared to a white or an upper-income student. And so if you look at the reading scores, you look at the math scores for 4th and 8th grade, you know, what we see when we break it down in low-income and African-American students and Hispanic students, we have 12 buckets to deal with.
Now, do we have a slide to show that?
We do.
Okay, so can we show that slide, please? Go ahead and tell us as soon as.
In 7 of those, if you look at the top 12 buckets, in 7 of those top 12, Connecticut has the worst achievement gaps in the country. In 4 more of those, we're top 5 in terms of worst achievement gaps. Of those top 12, there's only 1 where our achievement gap is just in the top 10 for states. And that's in 8th grade African American math. The numbers don't get any better when we look at our English language learner students. We see again, we're top 5, top 6 across the board. You know, what does this mean? This means that in Connecticut, if you're an African American student, if you're an Hispanic student in the state of Connecticut, you're performing on average 3 grade levels below your white and your upper class students. You're also 3 grade levels below.
So 8th graders are performing in the 5th grade?
Comparatively, yes. And if you look at the same thing, we often hear in Connecticut that the achievement gaps don't matter. We once had a state commissioner of education who said the achievement gaps in Connecticut were simply an optical illusion, that they don't exist because our top students are so much better than everybody else in the country that the gaps are really not there.
Oh, so because the top students are better, the fact that we also have many students who
Correct.
are much lower, that didn't count?
Correct. But when you look at these scores, again, this provides us a yardstick where we can compare state to state. We know that if you look at our African American students and you look at our Latino students, they're performing on average at least 2 grade levels behind African American and Latino students in Massachusetts and Maryland and other states.
Now, I saw a graphic that showed that African American students in Connecticut were performing 22.5% lower than Caucasian students, and Hispanic students were performing like 35% lower. Now, can we see that graphic? Was that the second one we had?
It's further down in the presentation.
Okay.
So, you know, what these numbers tell us is we're just not providing a high-quality public education for our students. And when you look historically, if we look at the next slide, and we see what's really happened in terms of Connecticut K-12 education.
Okay, can we see the next slide, please? So go ahead and tell us.
So if we look at 2003 to 2009, we look at what's happening across a number of different measures here. We see that in Connecticut, over these 6 years, spending per pupil, we often hear that we can't close the achievement gap because we don't have enough money in the system. Spending per pupil in Connecticut, when we adjust for inflation, has increased 20% over those 6 years. When we look at full-time employees that are employed by our school system, we've seen a 15% increase over the same period of time
In numbers of people.
in numbers of people.
Okay.
When we look at those NAEP scores, how we're doing nationally, we've seen our test scores improve 1 point. So at this rate, in about 183 years, we'll be able to close the achievement gap.